Cale Drummond ruled Scotland's darkest corners with a silence that crushed his enemies before they even knew they were targets. Morrick Fane's fists delivered final justice to anyone who dared challenge the Gravedust Syndicate. But when shadows began to close in, even the most dangerous gang Scotland had ever seen couldn't escape the storm that was coming. In the dim, rain-slicked streets of Glasgow's East End, whispers of a new power began to circulate. People didn't say the name out loud, but it travelled fast among terrified shopkeepers and jittery street dealers. The Gravedust Syndicate had arrived, and it moved like smoke, silent, cold, and choking. It wasn't just another street gang. This was something deeper, darker. Their rise wasn't fueled by flashy crimes or media attention. Instead, they operated in the shadows, slowly taking control of Scotland's criminal underworld like a disease, infecting every corner. At the centre of it all was Cale Drummond, a tall, pale man with glacier blue eyes and a permanent expression of calm cruelty. No one knew much about Cale's past. Some said he grew up in foster homes. Others claimed he'd once been a soldier who disappeared off the radar. Whatever. The truth, Cale had the mind of a tactician and the heart of a predator. He didn't shout to be heard. He didn't need to. When he entered a room, silence followed, and when he gave an order, it was obeyed without question. His rules were simple: loyalty, silence, and obedience. Breaking any one of them meant death. Cale's second-in-command was Morrick Fane, a former accountant turned criminal strategist. Morrick was lean, twitchy, and brilliant with numbers. He ran the business side of the operation, laundering dirty money through fake charities and property investments. He kept the books clean and the police confused. Morrick was the kind of man who could make millions disappear with a few keystrokes and had no problem ordering a hit if someone got too curious. He was Cale's brain when it came to money and expansion. Then there was Talavri, a woman no one ever underestimated. She had once been part of a rival gang that Cale crushed within weeks. Instead of killing her, Cale recruited her. She became his enforcer, deadly, efficient, and loyal only to results. Tala ran their drug operations, especially the distribution of a synthetic opioid that flooded the streets of Edinburgh and Dundee. She moved like a ghost, switching identities, changing phones, and wiping tracks before police could even form a clue. People who saw her face twice rarely lived to talk about it. Together, they built the Gravedust Syndicate from nothing. They started by taking over abandoned buildings and turning them into trap houses and weapons storage. Then they infiltrated shipping yards, bribing dock workers to smuggle in weapons and Eastern European drugs. They didn't start wars with other gangs. They absorbed them. Smaller groups folded under the promise of protection or were simply wiped out. No one could match their strategy or their cruelty. Kyle's way of operating turned the gang into a machine. Clean, silent, and utterly lethal. Their most brutal work wasn't done in the cities, but in the small towns, where people still left, their doors unlocked. In these quiet corners of Scotland, Kyle tested loyalty with blood. He sent messages using mutilated bodies left near police stations. Families who refused to cooperate vanished overnight. Entire villages were too afraid to speak the syndicate's name. What Cale understood better than anyone else was that fear, when planted deep, grows like roots in the ground. It spreads without needing to be watered. The authorities, for years, failed to notice the full scale of what was happening. The syndicate moved under their noses, dressing their members in suits and ties, running fake businesses, and throwing charity events that doubled as cover for smuggling meetings. Their crimes were hidden behind paperwork and bank transfers, far from the spray-painted alleys most police patrolled. By the time law enforcement realized how big the operation was, Cale had already taken control of half the drug market in Scotland and was moving into weapons trafficking. No one had seen anything like them. This wasn't a gang. It was an empire built on silence, betrayal, and blood. The Gravedust Syndicate didn't just kill, they erased. And in Scotland's darkest corners, Cale Drummond had become something more than a man. He had become a myth, whispered by criminals and feared by cops. And all of it had only just begun. The Gravedust Syndicate's control tightened, and their grip spread from Glasgow's decaying edges to the misty reaches of the Scottish Highlands. Where the cities offered wealth and anonymity, the rural areas brought something else: opportunity without oversight. Small towns like Braemore, Kilsharrow, and Dunsfell became ghostly staging grounds for the syndicate's darkest operations. There were no sirens, no headlines, just quiet roads, trembling locals, and secrets buried deeper than the locks. What began as a quiet expansion into these forgotten places quickly turned violent. Cale Drummond sent crews out to test the towns, drop shipments, bribe a few officials, buy off local toughs. If resistance appeared, it was dealt with swiftly and silently. One night, a local business owner in Kilsharrow refused to allow syndicate members to stash arms in the basement of his auto shop. The next morning, his entire family was found dead in their home, a silver coin placed neatly in each of their mouths. The killings were surgical. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, no mistakes. The silver coin became a calling card, a symbol of quiet death. Rumours spread fast, but nothing ever reached the press. Locals feared speaking out. Entire communities became prisoners in their own homes, unwilling to risk drawing attention. Some residents fled, others turned to silence as a survival tactic. In these rural parts of Scotland, fear didn't scream. It crept in through the cracks and lingered in shadows. Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, a man named Detective Orin Maddox was starting to piece things together. Orin wasn't flashy. He didn't care about promotions or politics. He was methodical, patient, and deeply obsessed with pattern recognition. When reports from various Highland towns started trickling into police databases, families missing, odd crime scenes, arsons with no motive, Orin noticed something others missed. The details didn't match typical criminal behavior. These crimes were too clean, too purposeful, and always involved silence from the surrounding community. It was like people were terrified of something they couldn't name. The turning point came when a teenage boy was found near death in a remote house in the village of North Glenlow. Neighbours reported smoke, and when emergency services arrived, they discovered the home ablaze. Inside, 2 adults were dead, execution style. But under the floorboards, curled up and burned, was the boy, barely alive, but breathing. His name was Baird Latch. His face was covered in soot, his body thin and bloodied. When medics pulled him out, he clutched something in his fist. A silver coin. Baird became the syndicate's first known survivor. He had witnessed his uncle and aunt being executed by masked men who said nothing the entire time. They used silenced weapons and moved like professionals. They searched the house, removed files, and torched it. But in their rush, they missed Baird. He told investigators what he had seen: men in all black gear, foreign accents, and a chilling level of discipline. When Orin Maddox read the report, he knew immediately. This wasn't local. This was organised. This was Gravedust. Baird's testimony, while fragile, gave Orin something he never had before: proof of the syndicate's activities outside urban zones. He began tracking similar arsons and disappearances, overlaying them with known locations tied to Cale Drummond's criminal network. One by one, the connections became clear. These weren't isolated crimes. They were part of a system. But Orin knew that if the syndicate learned Baird had survived, the boy wouldn't live another week. He arranged for Baird's identity to be changed, placed him under protection, and quietly began leaking controlled information to trap those connected to the rural killings. But playing with Gravedust meant playing with death. At the same time, the syndicate grew bolder. In one chilling incident, the small-town police chief of Dunverness was found hanged in his office, with a typewritten note pinned to his chest reading, "We govern now." No one took responsibility, but everyone understood. The syndicate didn't just want control, they wanted obedience through fear. In the Highlands, a new silence settled, heavier than before. People didn't look strangers in the eye. Pub conversations stopped when outsiders entered. And somewhere in that vast northern fog, Cale Drummond smiled from the shadows, knowing he had turned peaceful land into a graveyard of secrets. As winter settled over Scotland, the Gravedust Syndicate reached the height of its power. Snow blanketed the roads, hiding the tire tracks of unmarked vans. The chill in the air mirrored the quiet terror in every community they touched. By now, the Syndicate was more than a criminal network. It was a silent regime. The group had embedded itself deep into the infrastructure, bribing council members, infiltrating local police departments, and controlling ports from Aberdeen to Oban. But success brought with it arrogance, and arrogance always left cracks. Cale Drummond had begun to operate with increasing detachment. While still feared by his followers, he now relied more on lieutenants like Morrick Fane and Tala Vree to maintain daily control. Cale had turned inward, focusing on grander ambitions. He envisioned expanding beyond Scotland, to Ireland, then England. But this hunger for scale demanded risk. The Syndicate needed larger weapon caches, heavier shipments of drugs, and more. Aggressive moves in public sectors, and that's where the first fault line appeared. A transport shipment containing over £2 million worth of narcotics was intercepted outside Inverness. The truck had been rerouted by an anonymous tip. Police found 2 Gravedust couriers dead inside, execution style, but the drugs remained untouched. It was a message. Someone was watching. Cale was furious. This was the first sign that the organisation was no longer invisible. While Cale brooded, Morrick Fane grew paranoid. He ordered internal loyalty tests. Lower-level operatives were interrogated. Some disappeared. Morrick suspected leaks, but he didn't know where to look. To tighten control, he shifted operations out of urban strongholds and into forested areas, storing weapons in abandoned cabins and using nature itself as a shield. It worked for a time, but then 2 more facilities were discovered in rapid succession, one in Glenafton and another in the Cairngorms. Tala Vree warned Cale that someone on the inside was bleeding them dry. She began personally overseeing field operations, something she hadn't done in months. During one late night raid, she narrowly escaped an ambush by armed police. 3 of her men were killed. She returned to Glasgow livid and convinced that betrayal had taken root. The truth was more complicated. Detective Orin Maddox had created a covert task force, an unofficial group of ex-cops, hackers, and deep-cover informants working outside official channels. Funded quietly by a retired tech mogul whose son had overdosed on Gravedust's synthetic opioids, this team was small but focused. Their strategy wasn't to fight the Syndicate head-on, but to dismantle it piece by piece, gathering evidence, planting misinformation, and turning low-level members into silent assets. One of Orin's informants, a man known only as Elric Dane, had worked as a driver for Morrick Fane. Elric had a photographic memory and a grudge. After being beaten for questioning an assignment, he reached out through the dark web and was contacted by Maddox's team. Through Elric, they learned about transport routes, safe houses, and financial laundering fronts disguised as real estate firms. Every bit of intel he passed was cross-verified and used sparingly, ensuring the Syndicate wouldn't notice the leaks too quickly. But Cale noticed everything. When one of his safe houses in Fort William was raided with uncanny precision, he summoned Morrick and Tala for a private meeting in an underground vault beneath an abandoned church. Cale ordered a full audit of everyone in the organisation, every name, every location, every drop point. The Syndicate went into lockdown. Anyone suspected of disloyalty was eliminated. Bodies turned up in rivers, in burnt-out cars, and buried in peat bogs. Still, the damage had been done. Maddox's team had mapped almost 40% of the Syndicate's logistics. Arrests began happening in waves, carefully spaced to avoid suspicion. An accountant vanished. A shipping foreman confessed. A mid-level operative fled to Portugal. Gravedust's empire was bleeding, and Cale, for the first time, sensed the end circling like a wolf in the dark. But he wasn't ready to fall. Kyle ordered one final move, an act so violent it would reset the balance of power. He called it the Red Fog Directive. It wasn't just a purge, it was vengeance. It began just after midnight, when the first body turned up in the alley behind a warehouse in Dundee. A bullet in the skull, hands zip-tied, throat slit for good measure. No ID, no phone, no sign of who did it. But the syndicate knew. It was their own. And it wasn't just a hit, it was a warning. By the end of the week, 6 more were dead, all low to mid-tier operators. All killed with surgical precision, and in every case, a strange symbol was carved into their skin, a crude spiral with 3 slashes. It wasn't a gang tag. It was something new, something meant to unsettle. Kyle Drummond called for silence. No retaliation, not yet. He needed to understand what he was facing. Talavri began tracing the pattern of the kills, locations, timing, communication gaps, and found something chilling. The victims had all used the same relay tower near Loch Etive within 24 hours of dying. She ran a scan and found interference, a jamming signal, piggybacking off the syndicate's encryption. Someone had penetrated their tech, and whoever it was knew exactly how to avoid being tracked. The Red Fog Directive, Cale's last ditch plan for regaining control, was activated in secret. It wasn't just a call for blood, it was an internal reset. Entire cells were wiped out if their loyalty came into question. Warehouses were burned, accounts erased, contacts eliminated. Morrick Fane personally executed a dozen operatives in a single night after a shipment went missing near Perth. But the purge came too late. Fear had already started spreading among the ranks. People vanished, some defected, others went underground, and not everyone killed was actually disloyal. Meanwhile, Detective Orin Maddox's task force moved like ghosts through the ashes. Their years of silent preparation were paying off. The team had intercepted Cale's financial trails, rerouted shipments, and sabotaged shipments that would never reach their buyers. They left enough evidence behind to trigger internal suspicion, but not enough to make the syndicate realize they were under attack from outside. What appeared to be betrayals were carefully orchestrated illusions. The syndicate was collapsing on itself. The most devastating blow came in Aberdeen. The syndicate had long used a seafood export business as a front for weapons and human trafficking. But when police raided it, tipped off by Maddox, they didn't just find guns. They found ledgers, real physical ledgers, handwritten by a now-missing accountant. They contained decades of deals, payments, and codenames. It was the kind of evidence that could destroy empires. Cale was livid. He accused Talla of negligence, Morrick of weakness. The three met in a cold bunker beneath the old Edinburgh tunnels to regroup. But something had shifted. Talla didn't speak much. Her eyes lingered too long on the security monitors. Morrick, who once ruled with brute force, seemed distant, unsure of where the next hit would come from. For the first time, Kyle realized they were reacting, not controlling. Then came the final insult. In a sleek hotel room in Inverarray, a video appeared on every screen connected to the syndicate's secure network. It showed one of their senior lieutenants, bound and bloodied, speaking into the camera. He listed names, operations, dates, everything. At the end of the recording, a digitally masked voice gave a chilling statement. The soil will not forget. The blood it drinks. This is justice. This is consequence. Panic spread like wildfire. Syndicate members fled. Safe houses were abandoned. Loyalists turned themselves in or vanished into the night. Morrick Fane disappeared. His last known location was a private airfield in Argyll, but the plane he boarded never landed. Talla Vri went off-grid, her encrypted trail ending somewhere in Greenland. Only Cale remained, watching his empire disintegrate from a concrete bunker deep beneath Stirling. But Cale wasn't broken. He was planning. As Scotland breathed a little easier, thinking the worst had passed, Cale stared at a map pinned with red markers and whispered the next move into a burner phone. Even in ruin, the mind behind the monster was still alive. Winter set in harshly that year. Scotland's skies turned a permanent shade of grey as frost clung to the windows of buildings that had once housed whispers of the Gravedust Syndicate. With most of its structure shattered, the country seemed to exhale, believing the worst had passed. News outlets quietly acknowledged the arrests, the disappearances, and the shifting tides in Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh. But behind the silence, something darker stirred. Cale Drummond was still out there, and not everyone who had served the syndicate was ready to let go of what they had built. Cale had fled to a remote estate near the Cairngorms, protected by an underground passage system and reinforced with military-grade security. He moved like a ghost, communicating only through isolated messages, using a rotating group of messengers who never met him more than once. Despite the disintegration of his empire, Cale had one final play. He called it Project Fallwake. It was a scorched earth failsafe built over the years in case the syndicate was ever exposed. Dozens of caches hidden beneath ordinary homes, schools, and cemeteries contained explosives, toxins, and digital triggers. If he couldn't rule, Cale intended to leave scars so deep that Scotland would never forget. But Cale didn't count on the last traitor. Among the few syndicate members who hadn't been arrested or killed, one had turned completely against him, a man named Gravedust Knox. Former syndicate logistics chief, Gravedust was a nobody by design, quiet, unassuming, good with spreadsheets and shipping manifests. He was also deeply disillusioned. Gravedust had watched friends executed for minor mistakes, watched Cale erase entire communities for perceived slights. When he discovered a partial blueprint of Project Fallwake during a file purge, he made a choice. He contacted Orin Maddox. Gravedust handed over locations, access codes, and detailed instructions. He asked for nothing in return, only that Cale be stopped before more innocent blood was spilled. Maddox, realizing the scale of destruction that was about to be unleashed, activated the most dangerous counter-operation in Scotland's law enforcement history. With only days before Fallwake's activation date, task forces swept through the country, defusing bombs, destroying hard drives, and rescuing civilians unknowingly living above death traps. In one chilling raid near Oban, a schoolteacher and her children were pulled from a home seconds before the floor collapsed into a pit wired with explosives. In another case, a quiet chapel in the Highlands was found to be housing enough nerve gas to wipe out an entire town. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of Cale's final message. He had never wanted peace, only power through fear. Maddox knew it wasn't enough to stop the plan. He had to stop the man. Through Gravedust's intelligence, Maddox traced Cale's location to the Cairngorms estate. A joint task force descended on the site during a blizzard, hoping the weather would mask their approach, but Cale was ready. Automated turrets opened fire on the convoy. 2 officers were killed before they even made it to the outer perimeter. A drone strike was called off due to the blizzard, forcing the team to move in on foot through frozen terrain. Inside the compound, Cale watched from a surveillance room, calm and prepared. He had always known this day might come. But what he didn't expect was Talavri. Long thought missing, Tala had returned, only not to help Cale. She had secretly allied with Maddox weeks earlier, feeding him access codes and disabling parts of the estate's defenses. It was her quiet revenge for the way Cale had blamed and discarded her. While the task force breached the compound, Tala confronted Cale in his control room and activated a signal jammer that neutralized the last detonators. Maddox found Cale moments later, sitting in a chair, unarmed, staring at the security screens like they were showing him a dream ending too soon. He was arrested without resistance. The trial was swift. Cale Drummond was sentenced to life without parole in a maximum security facility beneath Fort Hallowgate, a prison designed for those who could never again see the outside world. With Cale gone, the Gravedust Syndicate officially ceased to exist. Streets once ruled by fear slowly returned to life, Nightclubs reopened, children played freely, and shopkeepers stopped looking over their shoulders. But in quiet corners of Scotland, old symbols still lingered, and some whispered that the spiral with 3 slashes had been seen again, this time etched into the snow.